Japan Airlines Flight 123. Japan Airlines Flight 123 was a flight scheduled to fly from Tokyo's Haneda Airport in Osaka on August 12, 1985. The plane, a Boeing 747-146SR, with the registration JA8119, was designed for short flights with lots of passengers, perfect for the busy route between these two major cities. On this flight, there were 509 passengers and 15 crew members on board. About 12 minutes after takeoff, something went terribly wrong. A part at the back of the plane, called the rear pressure bulkhead, suddenly broke apart. This caused a rapid loss of cabin pressure and ripped off the plane's vertical stabilizer, the big fin on the tail that helps keep the aircraft steady. Along with that, all 4 hydraulic systems, which control the plane's movements, stopped working. The aircraft became almost impossible to fly. The pilots did everything they could, trying to control the plane using just the engines. They managed to keep it in the air for 32 more minutes, but eventually, the plane crashed into Mount Takamagahara in Gunma Prefecture. Out of 524 people on board, only 4 passengers survived. It remains the deadliest single aircraft crash in history. After the crash, investigators discovered that the real cause went back to a mistake made 7 years earlier. In 1978, the same plane had hit its tail on the runway during a landing, damaging the rear pressure bulkhead. When it was repaired, Boeing mechanics didn't follow the correct procedure. Instead of using one continuous metal plate to fix it, they used 2 smaller ones. That mistake weakened the structure, and over time, it gave way, leading to the disaster in 1985. Charkhi Dadri mid-air collision. On November 12, 1996, a Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763 had just taken off from Delhi's Indira Gandhi International Airport. It was a Boeing 747 heading to Dhahran, Saudi Arabia with 312 people on board. At the same time, Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907, a cargo plane with 37 people, was flying in from Chimkent, Kazakhstan, and getting ready to land in Delhi. Both planes were flying through the same airspace, which was being used for takeoffs and landings at the same time. As the Saudi plane was climbing and the Kazakh plane was descending, the 2 aircraft ended up on a collision course. Near the village of Charkhi Dadri in Haryana, the Kazakh plane went lower than it was supposed to. Its wing hit the tail of the Saudi plane, causing the larger aircraft to break apart mid-air and crash. The Kazakh plane stayed in the air for a short while but quickly lost control and went down too. Tragically, all 349 people on both flights died, making it the deadliest mid-air collision ever recorded. When investigators looked into the crash, they found that the main reason was the Kazakh crew descending below their assigned altitude. One major problem was communication. The Kazakh pilots didn't fully understand the instructions from air traffic control because of the language barriers. The report also pointed out that there wasn't a proper radar system to track the planes' exact altitudes. After this tragedy, India became the first country in the world to make onboard collision avoidance systems, also called TCAS, mandatory for all commercial planes to help prevent something like this from happening again. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 was an international flight from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia to Beijing, China. It took off on March 8, 2014 with 227 passengers and 12 crew members on board. The plane, a Boeing 777-200ER, was supposed to make a routine journey of about 2,700 miles between the 2 cities. But around 40 minutes after takeoff, something strange happened. The plane's transponder, which helps track its location, stopped working, and it lost contact with air traffic control. Later, military radar showed that the plane had made an unexpected turn west, crossing back over Malaysia and then flying northwest over the Andaman Sea. That was the last time it was seen on radar. Further analysis of satellite data suggested that the plane kept flying for several more hours. Instead of going north toward China, it turned south and headed deep into the Indian Ocean. After that, all communication stopped and the plane disappeared. A massive international search began right away. At first, teams focused on the South China Sea and the Andaman Sea. But when new data came in, they shifted the search to the southern part of the Indian Ocean. Despite covering huge areas, they couldn't find the main wreckage. Then, in July 2015, a piece of the plane's wing called a flaperon washed up on Reunion Island near Madagascar. This confirmed that the plane had crashed into the Indian Ocean. Even after years of investigation, the exact cause of the disappearance remains a mystery. A report released in 2018 suggested that someone may have deliberately changed the plane's path, but who did it or why was never discovered. China Airlines Flight 611. On May 25, 2002, China Airlines Flight 611 took off from Taipei's Chiang Kai-shek International Airport heading to Hong Kong. It was an international flight with 225 people on board. 206 passengers, and 19 crew members. The trip across the Taiwan Strait was supposed to be short and routine, as this was a very common route. But about 20 minutes after takeoff, the plane was cruising at 35,000 feet. Something went terribly wrong. The aircraft suddenly broke apart in midair over the strait. People on the ground saw pieces of the plane falling from the sky. Soon after, radar contact was lost. Later wreckage was found floating in the sea and scattered on nearby islands. Sadly, no one survived. Investigators from Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council looked into what caused the crash. They discovered that the plane had a serious structural weakness caused by something that happened over 20 years earlier. Back in 1980, the same plane had hit its tail on the runway during landing, a tail strike. The damage should have been repaired properly by replacing the affected section or following Boeing's detailed instructions, but instead, a metal patch called a doubler plate was used incorrectly. It covered up the damage but didn't actually fix the problem. Over the years, the hidden damage slowly got worse. With each flight and every pressurization cycle, the metal grew weaker. Eventually, it gave out completely, and the plane couldn't hold together anymore. Experts later said that if the repair had been done the right way in 1980, this crash likely never would have happened. Singapore Airlines Flight 006. On October 31, 2000, Singapore Airlines Flight 006 was flying from Singapore to Los Angeles, with a planned stop in Taipei, Taiwan. It was a normal international flight, using a Boeing 747-400. The plane first flew from Singapore to Taipei as planned, where it landed for its stopover. Later that night, the plane was getting ready to take off again, this time heading to Los Angeles. The weather was bad. There was heavy rain and low visibility because of Typhoon Zhangzhane. The crew was told to use runway 05L for takeoff, but by mistake, they turned onto the wrong runway, 05R, which was actually closed for repairs and had construction equipment on it. Not realizing they were on the wrong runway, the pilots began the takeoff. As the plane sped up, it hit the construction equipment. The impact caused the aircraft to break apart and catch fire. Out of 179 people on board, 83 died, while 96 survived, some with serious injuries. An investigation by Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council found that the main reason for the accident was that the pilots didn't confirm they were on the correct runway before taking off. The bad weather made things worse, and the closed runway didn't have enough clear signs or lights to show it was under construction. Indonesia Lion Air Flight 610. On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 took off from Soekarno-Hatta International Airport in Jakarta. It was heading to Depati Amir Airport in Pangkal Pinang, Indonesia. The flight was a short domestic trip, carrying 181 passengers and 8 crew members. Just a few minutes after takeoff, the pilots noticed something was wrong with the flight controls. They contacted air traffic control and asked for permission to return to Jakarta. But before they could make it back, the plane went into a sudden dive and crashed into the Java Sea only 13 minutes after takeoff. Tragically, all 189 people on board died. An investigation by Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee found that the main issue came from a faulty sensor called the angle of attack, or AOA sensor. This sensor gave incorrect data to a system called MCAS, an automatic feature meant to help control the plane's nose position. Because of the wrong data, MCAS kept forcing the plane's nose down again and again. The pilots didn't fully understand how MCAS worked, and they hadn't been trained on how to deal with it. This made it difficult for them to fight against the system's repeated nose-down commands. It was later discovered that this same plane had shown similar problems on earlier flights, but the issues weren't properly fixed. The investigation also pointed out serious flaws in how Boeing designed the 73 MAX and how the aircraft was approved for flying, especially with how little information was shared about MCAS. Korean Air Flight 801. On August 6, 1997, Korean Air Flight 801 was flying from Seoul, South Korea to Guam, a U.S. island in the Pacific that's popular with tourists. The plane was a Boeing 747 and had 254 people on board, 237 passengers, and 17 crew members. As the flight got close to Guam in the early morning hours, the weather wasn't great. It was raining heavily and visibility was poor. To make things more difficult, the airport's landing system, which usually helps guide planes down, wasn't fully working, so the pilots had to rely on a less precise method to land. During the approach, the pilots thought they were closer to the runway than they actually were. They started descending too early and too low, and then, ultimately, the plane crashed into a hill called Nimitz Hill, just a few miles past the airport. Sadly, 229 people died, and only 25 survived with injuries. After the crash, U.S. investigators looked into what happened. They found that the captain didn't properly go over the approach details or follow the correct procedure. The other pilots in the cockpit also didn't double-check what the captain was doing. Fatigue, poor timing, and miscommunication all played a role. Another problem was that a safety system at Guam's air traffic control meant to warn if a plane gets too low had been turned off, so no alert was sent in time to prevent the crash. AirAsiaFlight 8501. On December 28, 2014, Indonesia Air Flight 8501 was scheduled to fly from Surabaya, Indonesia to Singapore. It was a regular short international flight using an Airbus A320. On board were 155 passengers and 7 crew members. About 40 minutes after takeoff, while flying at 32,000 feet over the Java Sea, the pilots asked to turn left and climb to 38,000 feet to avoid bad weather. Air traffic control allowed the turn, but told them to stay at their current altitude because there were other planes nearby. Not long after that, the plane vanished from the radar. Later, search teams confirmed it had crashed into the Java Sea, and sadly, all 162 people on board lost their lives. The investigation, led by Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee, found that the crash started with a technical problem in part called the Rudder Travel Limiter Unit, or RTLU. The issue triggered several warnings in the cockpit. In an attempt to fix it, the captain reset the circuit breakers, but this action unintentionally turned off the autopilot and changed how the flight controls worked. Because of that, the plane suddenly climbed steeply, lost speed, and stalled in the air. Unfortunately, the crew couldn't recover from the stall. Investigators said the crew didn't respond to the situation properly and didn't work together well in those critical moments. They also found that the RTLU had been acting up for over a year before the crash, which pointed to poor maintenance. China Eastern Airlines Flight 5735. On March 21, 2022, China Eastern Airlines Flight 5735 was on a domestic trip from Kunming to Guangzhou, 2 big cities in southern China. The flight was being operated by a Boeing 737-800 and had 123 passengers and 9 crew members on board. It was just a routine journey along one of the busiest routes in the country. But midway through the flight, something shocking happened. While cruising at a normal altitude over the Guangxi region, the plane suddenly went into a near vertical dive. It dropped rapidly and crashed into a forested hillside near the city of Wuzhou. The crash caused a huge explosion and fire, completely destroying the aircraft. Tragically, all 132 people on board lost their lives. It was China's deadliest air disaster in almost 30 years. Authorities started an investigation right away. They recovered both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder, which were sent off for analysis. Early reports showed that the engines didn't fail, and all crew members were qualified and healthy. But the flight data revealed no distress call, and it looked like the plane's controls were manually pushed into a descent, leading to questions about whether it was intentional. As of 2025, the final report still hasn't been released, and the exact cause of the crash remains unclear.